I'd like to invite my friend Curtis Cavers to come forward. Curtis may not need much introduction, but he's a farm boy from Larivaire that grew up on the hills.
Yep.
His farm was at the top of the Holiday Mountain ski hill. So he knows something about terrain in Manitoba. And he's worked with Manitoba Agriculture, a manure specialist, I recall. Agriculture Canada, you manage the site in Portage. And most recently, you're doing a PhD here with this type of topic in mind. But you've wrapped together a number of, you're drawing from a number of sources for information here today to share with us. You're a certified crop advisor, you were on the board, you were the president at one time for the Prairie program, so that's great. And we welcome you to share with us on restoring productivity of eroded hilltops. Kind of like,
yes.
You got a comment for this?
Honestly, I was more worried about John's giving the introduction than I was about giving the talk. So hopefully everything's a breeze from here on in, but we'll see. I'll try and not mess up the technology and try and keep things on time here. So yeah, I'm going to talk about restoring productivity on eroded hilltops, talking about, well, the precursor to the title was landscape agronomy. And if you know, whenever Marla, myself, or folks like us talk about stuff, the biggest thing we want people to come away with is, that fields aren't uniform. Sometimes they can be flat and still not uniform. Today we're going to talk about fields that definitely aren't flat. So eroded hilltops, there's lots of different names for them, also known as knolls, uplands, crests, summits, plateaus, and might be pushing it a bit. That's the other thing I wanted to tell you in here. So it's kind of code to myself, but also code to you. Anything that's in that kind of dark red color is a potentially controversial word or statement that could get me in trouble. My 11-year-old daughter, I don't know if it's tween language or whatever, she'd say, "Dad, that's sus." Suspicious or suspect or whatever. Dad, that's sus. So there's a few sus words that we'll be dealing with today, but these eroded hilltops, obviously they're the highest elevation in the landscape. They have a convex slope curvature, so runoff is the dominant fate of water when it encounters that part of the landscape. They tend to be droughty, and they're erosion prone, whether that's wind, water, or tillage. That's probably the part of the landscape that's most prone to any of those types of erosion. And in terms of soils, well, we've got thin topsoil at best. In that picture there, we've got missing topsoil, or it's been incorporated in with the subsoil, so very light colored soil colors coming out. Low organic matter, organic carbon. In a lot of cases, high inorganic carbon. That's what the IC means, and obviously poor seedbed condition. What could be up for some debate are these infertile soils up there? Naturally, they probably are, but I'd be soil testing them because a lot of times those hilltops come back with high nutrients in the soil test because there's been so little crop removal over the years. So you can have a look at that at some point. So generally talking about upland soils, I do my soil thing, the three factors that we're interested in: texture, drainage, and ag capability. Upland soils can have just about any kind of texture. The drainage, we'd say, is well or moderately well. Again, runoff is the dominant fate of the water, and the agriculture capability is going to have some type of limitation there. You probably are not going to have a class 1 soil on these eroded hilltops. It's going to be, you're lucky if it'll be a 2. It's probably a 3 or 4 or whatever. So that's just saying more severe limitations there. So either eroded soils that are droughty, don't hold a lot of moisture, or at the very least soils that have some slope and some topography that you're dealing with. I'm trying to tie in a lot of the stuff that we talked about over the last day and a half to a day and 3/4. So things that probably you've heard before on this. Some of these soils are weedy, again, because of where there's not a lot of crop competition up there. So we have that to worry about. We also have poor herbicide efficacy there because of the droughtiness and the slow breakdown due to low organic matter. again, what these soils are not is sometimes easier to describe than what they are. They're not wet, almost never. If they're wet, everything else is flooded. They're not saline. Because saline, you need a high water table to cause issues with that. But the only one that you could possibly debate is they're not compacted. At least they're not compacted due to wheel traffic, because again, you need it to be wet if you're going to have compaction. They could be compact in that they've got some crappy subsoil to deal with. Oh, my language, sorry. What they look like. So, again, now not to mess things up here, that's an old aerial photo. So again, looking for whitish colored spots in the landscape, that's probably eroded hilltops. This is a different type of, it's not an yield map, it's an elevation or a terrain map, and the vertical exaggeration there is like 10 times. So it's not like we're dealing with mountains or anything, but those pink areas are your eroded hilltops there. And zooming in, getting close into the field, seeing what you're working with there, that's kind of what you're, well, stretching it, calling it topsoil, but that's what you're seeding your crop into in some of these cases. There's a couple little soybean plants trying to make a go of it there, and then on soil like this, digging down, well, we're not seeing a lot of nice black, rich topsoil, not seeing a lot of nice soil structure or things like that too. So it's not looking great. So why does the title, why Restoring Productivity in Eroded Knolls matters? Well, these eroded hilltops are, as you probably know, they're kind of the forgotten part of the landscape, especially when we're looking at yield maps. They're the part that's usually red, if not always. They're consistently the lowest yielding parts of the field, especially in years of low to normal rainfall. And they typically occupy, again, it's a general rule of thumb, but 10 to 30% of the landscape. So they're a minor part, but they have this problem with it. So sometimes it's easier just to forget about them, but that's not how we make every acre pay or every dollar pay. Relative productivity, a good rule of thumb is these parts of the landscape usually yield about 50% of the better parts of the landscape, so whether that's your mid-slope or depression or whatever, sometimes as low as 30% or maybe even lower in extreme cases. The goal that we would have on this, and this was Dr. Jamoya from Soil Science Department, who works in land reclamation, like from oil wells and things like that. When they reclaim lands, they're usually looking for a goal of 80% of what they used to have. So if we're talking from a reclamation standpoint, that's what we'd be shooting for. And again, this might be leading into some controversial things, but isn't it enough? A lot of these parts, especially if we're talking Western Canada, outside the Red River Valley, isn't it enough to say we're practicing no-till? Doesn't that solve all our problems and things like that? And a lot of this work, if you go back far enough on that, would have come from, I think, a conversation with Robert Stevenson and others who were some of the pioneers of zero-till, that say no, it's not. It's we've been zero-tilling or no-tilling for years and years, and these eroded hilltops still aren't very productive. And why is that? There's two reasons for that. There's some red letters. Soil formation is a very slow process. We talk a lot about these days about trying to restore soil health or trying to increase carbon sequestration and that, and I think it's important, but sometimes I think we get caught up in the excitement of it and think, oh well, let's see if we can do this in 5 years or maybe even 10 years, and it's like you're still kind of talking in a time frame that's making this really challenging to do, because soil formation is a slow process that takes decades, if not centuries, rather than years. And the second reason that's challenging is that we're dealing with the part of the landscape that's probably most susceptible, well, to any type of erosion, but certainly susceptible to what we call tillage erosion. And it's kind of I tried to find some good news about this. It's a good news, bad news thing. It's that eroded parts of the landscape are usually not the entire field, or at least in the case of tillage erosion, we'll have places where it's eroded, but we'll have other places in that field, in that landscape, where it's been deposited. And so it's not so much a true soil loss as it would be from like wind erosion, where soil blows away or blows into the ditch or washes away with water erosion. It's more of a redistribution. And and we'll get into this a bit later, but yeah, it's technically at least it's reversible. The bad news on it, and that might trigger Marla on some stuff there, that picture, but it's just for background, is that it still seems to be a very difficult concept for some people to I don't get their heads around or believe it's actually happening as much as it's happening. When we talk about tillage erosion, it's just the physical scraping, dragging of soil material off a certain part of the landscape, moving soil by tillage. And as we get more aggressive types of tillage and higher speeds, this has become more prominent. And of course, in this case, gravity is your enemy on these things. So we have to watch for that. The other two parts there is tillage is, well, I shouldn't say tillage is good or bad. It's maybe a necessary evil. It's probably one of these things. It's a tool, and it depends, well, it certainly depends on how you use it. So it's not so much the type of tillage, it's how you use it, how fast you use it, when you use it, things like that. And that backdrop there was Marla and John and others' use of that at the crop diagnostic school, I don't know, 2018. So Anne Verholland, that was her protocol for an effective demos. Trench in a bunch of corn seed or wheat seed or whatever we use there, and then drive your tillage equipment perpendicular across that and see how far you can move it. So there's going uphill, going downhill at different speeds, different equipment, and so forth. Topsoil is kind of the general term that we're worried about. It's the secret ingredient in terms of productivity. It's the most valuable part of the landscape. And basically there's the two components that we're most interested in. That is the organic carbon, which we're saying OC here, so that's what is usually what makes the soil black, at least in our part of the world. And then the inorganic carbon, or the calcium carbonate, things like that, what makes the soil white. So it's backwards to your way of thinking. The good guys wear the black hats in this case, and the bad guys wear the white hat. It's not so much that inorganic carbon is bad, but in the absence of organic carbon, now you've got this material at the surface that's going to tie up nutrients, it's going to make water less wanting to infiltrate, and so forth. So we'll keep that in mind. Organic carbon too is kind of, again, if we had to pick one or a very small handful of good indicators of soil health, organic carbon would be one of the ones right at the top. So to get to the point here of trying to restore productivity on these eroded hilltops, there's several options that we can look at. I was able to think of about 7, and we want to kind of compare and contrast here the pluses and minuses of each. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, or at least not intentionally saying one is better than the other, but we'll go through each one here with time, as time allows, and kind of give a quick assessment of each. So the first one about increasing cropping inputs, and there's a couple ways to do that. You could add more fertilizer on eroded hilltops to try and boost yields, at least in the short term, or you could try and increase your seeding rates. So the fertilizer, that's some classic research. You can tell by the age of the slides that I was able to find there from Carl Shakowich and one of his grad students at the time. So the front bars there is like, as more topsoil is removed, yields go down. But on certain soil types, if you add fertilizer to that, you can overcome those yield losses and that. But the key is that it's only on certain soil types. You go to sandier soils or soils that maybe are lower in organic matter, you get the same problem. You reduce your yields with more topsoil removed, but when you try and add more fertilizer, you can't overcome that yield loss. So this one at the back is not as big as this one at the front. So fertilizers are expensive, and if they're not effective, then that's maybe not the best way to go. Increasing the seeding rates is something that you could do in certain cases here, but again, it's going to be site specific. So showing the example there is at our home station at Portage, where it's essentially non-eroded, minimal eroded, level, whatever. Did a quick little demo there, replicated 4 times. Yields on the regular spot there yield about 70 bushels to the acre. We doubled the seeding rate, we actually decreased the yield. We doubled the fertilizer, we hardly increased the yield. And we did both, we really dropped it. But you take that over to an eroded site, an eroded hilltop, where the yields obviously are not so great. So we're not working with a lot, so what can we do to try and improve it? If we double the seeding rate, we can get an additional 6 bushels or so out of it. If we added some topsoil, about 6 inches of topsoil, we got another 4 bushels out of that. I can't do math in front of people, so if I get this wrong, just read it yourself. And if you add both, you get that additive effect. So that's kind of, maybe I could stop right there, that if you take a couple of these ideas and put them together, hopefully there's some complementary effects going on. Oh, and then just as a frame of reference, other people have talked about a thing called strategic planning, and I like the catchphrase, crop the best, diversify the rest. So I'm trying to give you a diversity of options here for these hilltops. So increasing the water supply by irrigation. So Andrew McGuire was here, 4 years ago? Again, can't do math in my head. In front of people and presented here. And one of the big things he talked about, trying to increase productivity, especially on soils that may not be the most healthy, is that it's all about the water. You can overcome a myriad of limitations by having a proper amount of available water for a crop. The issue becomes, and I don't know if Darren is still here, but it's the economics when we get into irrigation. So, just pulled some numbers there quickly for an irrigation system now. You're looking at over $1 million, and if you need to tile drain on top of that, well, then you got to add that in. I don't know, maybe $1 million is just the running rate for most things now. I don't know, but it seems like a lot to me. And you still have to assume your land base is suitable for irrigation. You still have to make sure you have water that's available, that you're allowed to use for irrigation. So it's not a given and a sure thing either. But Andrew left us with a good rule of thumb at the end of his talk there. He talked about do whatever you can to maximize photosynthesis and whatever you can to, at least in general, minimize tillage. This next one, I don't know if I need to say too much about it because Ashley covered a lot of it there about redistributing or trying to make more efficient use of crop residues. And there was a couple gentlemen that kind of got me thinking about this one again. I always thought it showed up in a lot of historical literature, and it's like, I don't know if many people do things with crop residues unless they have livestock, and then it's usually about baling the straw, things like that. But Dwayne Thompson, who's out of Saskatchewan, he did a whole presentation on this a couple years ago, and it really got me interested in thinking about it again. So we did another little demo also at that Altamont site, trying to add straw. We just took a bale out and tried to spread out the straw and see if that would do anything on these hilltops to improve things. It was about plus 40 that day. So I don't know if I'm more lazy or just smart, but I'm only spreading so much straw out there and probably didn't spread it thin enough. So adding straw, especially if you add it too thick to a too small a crop, we got a yield reduction. We still had the added topsoil where we got a slight boost, but when you added both together, we didn't get what we wanted. And that's probably more of anything just a cautionary tale to say you can add residues, but if you add way too much at the wrong time or the wrong way, you're going to cause more harm than good. In fact, in most of that, they'll say chaff is the one of interest. Chaff is the more important one rather than the straw. So chaff collection, again, Dwayne was into that and talking about different ways we could do that, and it kind of got me thinking there too. If we're dealing with a variable landscape, can we remove it from the low spots that are cold and wet and where too much residue is causing problems, and that others alluded to that today, and put it up on top where maybe it'll do the most good. Retain some moisture, reduce evaporation. Even if we're dealing with weed management and want to put the weeds somewhere, well, might as well put them in the most hostile environment in that landscape and let them try and germinate and see what they can do there. The other part that, just to bring up here again too, Dwayne Beck, that others may know about him too, he's been here a number of times over the years and has scolded us, right, John? He has scolded us. Just me. He's scolded. Yeah. John is like Teflon and I'm like Velcro. That's kind of how that works on there. But true no-tillage is no tillage. And in a lot of these cases, even heavy harrows, if they're set up fairly aggressively, are actually a form of tillage. So it's not something that we say, you should never use it if you're no-till. But it's more about semantics at this point. It's saying, call a spade a spade. If you're not no-till, just say, I'm I'm aspiring to be no-till. I'm reduced till, but high disturbance at times, or whatever. I think the one speaker yesterday said, well, I'm reduced tillage or conservation till because I don't plow. Well, there's some semantics there too, but it varies from region to region. I digress. Other options that you could do, add livestock manure or compost as a potential to improve productivity on these hilltops. Livestock integration, that was on the previous slide there too. If people have livestock, I've got 10 minutes, okay. Then bale grazing might be a good thing because you're putting material up on these hilltops to feed the livestock. The livestock are doing their business up there, so they're adding manure naturally. Issues with dealing with manure, this is from the past life, about whether there's enough to do what we need to do with it, whether we put the right amount on, or are we going to get in trouble for it, and what about smells? So that's the downside. The upside on things like that, Frank Larney used to work out of Alberta at Agriculture Canada, talked about the legacy effects of manure, especially if you add high amounts on for a regular time. But again, there's a time factor in this. So this came up, David Lobb shared it with me. He had a discussion one time with another chap, and he said, skill testing question here. How long would it take to increase soil organic matter by 1% if you're applying beef manure to meet phosphorus rates? The clue is it's in years. How many years?
3.
Okay.
100.
Split the difference. Somewhere in there.
30.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know how patient you are. I'm not asking anybody's age, but that's been the challenge for a lot of our soil management recommendations is do this, but you're going to have to stick with it, and you're going to have to do it for a long time. And not everybody's interested in that. I may skip this one because other organic amendments follow the same principles as you would with manure management. So, and some products, if you're not familiar, do some research on that, buyer beware. Now this one, hi Yvonne, I saw you up there, yeah. I thought of bringing props. I thought of bringing a blindfold and a cigarette on that, but I thought they might say, oh, there's no smoking allowed here, don't do that. But I'm not against cover crops, and I'm certainly not against Yvonne or Callum or any folks that have done that. The work they do in cover crops is great, and I know there's numerous benefits. So I'm not dissing you guys. I'm dissing these eroded hilltops, is what I'm trying to say here in this red stuff, is that they might be a good thing to do, but they are a bear to establish on lands that are dry, are eroded, are a poor seed bed, and so forth. So you could try, but your success might not be 100%. It might not be 1 year out of 1 year. So, you know, and there's less biomass to start with, so there's less carbon to sequester. I don't know if putting in it in permanent forage would be an option, and I don't know what the economics are. So I'm just raising questions on things like that, but like I say, I'm trying to give objective pluses and minuses to all these ones. Then I'm going to turn around and probably sound like I'm way high on this one for obvious reasons and things like that, but this one has got its challenges as well. So another thing that you could do that we're trying to figure out on this is how about if we take soil that we think has been dragged off the hilltops down slope and bring it back up and put it on the slope? Would that do some good to us? It would give you an immediate increase in soil organic carbon, so it's not sequestration, it's like importing something. So it's like if you're a Jets fan, well, do we draft and develop and try and get some good players like that? Or I don't know, or if we're Chevy, should we just tell them to go and get Crosby? Or maybe somebody younger than Crosby, I don't know. Well, I digress on stuff. But Andrew McGuire, after he was here, he backed us up on that too. He said it might be more important to reconsider or to consider redistributing soil organic matter rich topsoil in these areas rather than trying to just increase it in place there. So some of that, I think I can show you that does have promise. When it comes to crop yields, well, that depends. So you can make a sponge bigger, but if we don't get enough water to fill that sponge and grow a crop, it may not work. So, of course, when we do this, sometimes we've done this in dry years. Okay, it should be a one-time practice if it's done right. done right's in quotes because it depends, and we're still trying to figure out how to do it right, but this is what it looks like. We're just basically suggesting take 10, 15, 20 centimeters, oh, sorry, John, 4, 6, or 8 inches of topsoil. There's the blindfold and the cigarette there again. And take it from down in the lower spots where we have abundant topsoil to begin with, and put it up on the hilltops where we have very little, if any, to work with. So that's what it looks like. And this is some of the data from some of the work that's been done so far on that. And again, so potentially, do we increase the concentration of a soil organic matter? Some previous work there by Sharon Schneider, the poster that we had out there showed, and I left this in metric just because, you know, I didn't want to say, oh, it's 112% increase in soil organic matter. What you mean, you went from 1 to 113%? No, I mean we went from basically 2.9% organic matter to 6.2% overnight. You know, from taking the soil and putting it there. Bang, it's there. Similarly, in Manitoba, David Lobb and Diane Smith did something, got 108% increase in doing it. The more eroded the site is, the more of a response you get on that. So some of the soils that I've been working on, apparently, are less severely eroded than that. They're probably still considered high erosion, but not severe erosion. So I got a 53% increase in organic matter concentration doing that. Comparing it with some of the other practices, 21 years of no-till, a 25% increase. Multiple beef manure applications, a 19% increase. And then cover cropping from various places in North America for 5 years, so that's cover cropping every year for 5 years, was roughly an 8% increase in that. And then when you look at trying to increase your soil organic carbon stocks, so an indication of your sequestration rate, we went from, by adding the topsoil, we went from 49 tons of carbon per acre. That took a lot of converting, John, so I hope you like that. From 49 tons per acre to 67, a 36% increase. Whereas when you no-till, it's about a 200 to 400 pounds of carbon per acre per year, and cover crops 200 or so pounds per carbon per acre per year. Seeding it down to grass, well, you can get lots coming off, sequestered per year, up to 2,600 pounds per acre per year, but what are you getting for yield? It's seeded down to grass. So the other two that did the landscape restoration, they're showing some increases in yields in these hilltops. Depends on the year, depends on the crop, and there's going to be some reduction in the depressions. The thing that we're trying to prove or trying to confirm, though, is that hopefully by adding the topsoil, the improvements we get on the hilltop are greater and longer lasting than the depressions or the reductions in yield we get in the depressions. Hopefully with an abundance of moisture there, those are shorter lasting and less severe. So hopefully, it's like an equalization payment. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but hopefully in the long run that pans out. So there's the summary page on the pluses and minuses of the 7 things we've talked about. The future strategies, again, trying to look after some of these things. I don't know if anybody follows the Hefty brothers, but they talk a bit about this, and whether that's good or bad, they'll say fix the soil first, then talk about your cropping strategy and things like that. And again, I'm not trying to rank and say one practice is better than the other. In fact, what I'm hoping to say is that look at your situation, look at the options that you have, and pick and choose some of these. So my shorthand there is saying, well, maybe you restore the landscape first, move the topsoil around, then go to no-till so that you minimize how much movement you have, and do some of the other things, or one of the main other things while you do it. Like they shouldn't be exclusive. It shouldn't be an either or. And then when it comes to tillage, you say, well, pick one. You know, you can be true low disturbance, no-till, or maybe we just, if we know we got to do tillage, we do it strategic and we do it smart. So we look at how to manage speed, direction, and things like that. And I know I'm just about out of time. Put the soil where you need it to do the most benefit. Keep it in place, and if we have to still do tillage, hopefully we can do that without that being heresy, and try and make the landscape behave more uniformly. We maybe still have this, but at least behaves more uniformly. There's my acknowledgements for people that have helped me a lot. 2 people that are sus there are in red. You can see that, and we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful, Curtis. And this may be, next time I introduce you, I might have to introduce you as Dr. Curtis Cavers,
You
but not
always
yet.
say that, though.
Not yet. So, thank you. Was there one question? You good for that? No? Well, that's good, because we have a very special parting gift for you. This plus one of the ones that Tammy will bring. And we've got another short presentation that our chairs, Tammy Jones and Marla Rickman, will make.